right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA task list series with F5 preference assessments. This is one of those items that many people, especially if they were previously behavior technicians, try to make more complicated than it really is. The thing about so many of our task list items is that they don't change between being a technician and being a behavior analyst. They might get a little more complex, they might get a little more meaty, but they don't change. So we're going to keep preference assessments as simple as possible. Don't get confused. One of the easiest things to know and understand are preference assessments. So let's walk through them very, very simply. As always, check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do to get all of our updates. When you pass your exam, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. All right, preference assessments identify potential reinforcers. This is what I like to stress. If you look in Cooper, preference assessments are right above reinforcer assessments, but we're only talking here about preference assessments. What's the difference between a preference and a reinforcer? Well, a preference is something somebody likes. It's a potential motivator. It's a potential reinforcer. But just because you like something doesn't make it motivating. It doesn't mean you're going to work for it. So preference assessments identify potential reinforcers. That's very, very important that we understand early on. So with it, there's a three-step process. First, you want to gather a large number of stimuli that may serve as reinforcers. This is especially true working with kids with disabilities or adults with disabilities or adults with delays, kids with delays, any of the populations that we very often work with who may seem to have very limited preferences. You want to gather as many items as possible. Now, that doesn't mean we just want to look on the internet for what is popular at that time. We want to actually go through the process of interviewing the client, if possible, those around the client, getting an idea what could serve as a potential reinforcer. Gather as many as possible. It's going to make your assessment stronger. Then, once you have your stimuli, you're going to systematically present those using one of these methods. How do we choose a method? With anything else, you've got to take into consideration the skill level, the developmental level, your time, your resources. What are you trying to accomplish? There is no one size fit all recipe. So you need to consider what's going to serve my purpose. For example, a single stimulus and a paired stimulus can be done pretty easily ongoing, right? So every session almost, you can do some sort of preference assessment. With the free operant and the multiple stimulus, where you need many items to conduct, this is going to be a lot more systematic. So think about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then 3, items that are greatly preferred. So you've done the assessment. And so items that are preferred and even less preferred are now tested to see, do they serve as reinforcement? So you can see in our process, we're actually getting to reinforcer assessments. And how do we know if something's reinforcing? Well, we have to look at its effect on behavior. And notice, we're not just taking the highly preferred items. We want to take items that maybe seem less preferred at the time and still test those. Because assessments are never going to be 100% accurate. They're never going to be 100% reliable. We have to repeat. And so anything that potentially could be a reinforcer, you want to test. The more reinforcers we have, the stronger we can make our reinforcement and our reinforcement schedules. Let's get into each type of assessment. First, single stimulus, probably the most straightforward. It's exactly what it sounds like. You're going to present one stimulus at a time. So let's say we present square. Responses towards item are recorded. So however you operationalize that, do they reach for it? Do they engage with it? Do they touch it? Those are your responses. And then you establish hierarchies through percentages of responses per stimulus. So let's say we were comparing a square and a circle, and each were presented 10 times. This was approached 3 times, this 5. Well, that's going to turn into 50%. This is going to be 30%. There's your hierarchy, right? This is number 1. This is number 2. Very basic, very straightforward, can be done almost every session, really any session. Limited resources, making it a great way to quickly do many assessments. Now, single stimulus is arguably the worst at choosing a hierarchy, but like everything else, it serves its place. That leads us to a paired stimulus, previously called a forced choice. You really hear paired stimulus much more these days. Paired stimulus is arguably the best way to establish a hierarchy. So if we think about it, we take our same example. We're going to present a square and a circle at the same time, and responses towards items are recorded, and only one item can be approached. And so let's say we have an array, or we have a total of square, circle, triangle, and diamond. So we're going to present all those together in pairs of twos as many times as you'd like, and we're going to get some sort of percentages. And then we're going to rank them by how many times did the client approach them? Did they take them? We might get a hierarchy 1, 2, 4, 3. And this is a little stronger, right? Because we're comparing them against other stimuli directly. And every single stimuli is getting a chance to be approached. So single stimulus, pair stimulus, very, very similar. Now, what about multiple stimulus with and without replacement? Let's think about what it's called. Multiple stimulus without replacement, knowing nothing else. What does that sound like to you? To me, it sounds like when something's taken, nothing's being replaced. It's exactly what it is. So let's say we have square, circle, triangle, and we present all those at the same time. Multiple stimulus, you can have as many stimuli as is feasible. Once an item is selected, that selected item is not replaced. So let's say the circle was taken. Our next array would be triangle, square with the positions changed. Now, you can also establish a hierarchy. Obviously, circle was chosen first, so that would be 1. But unless you do it multiple times, you could fall for many biases, right? Potentially positional biases. Maybe that day they preferred one item over the other. So you can establish hierarchies here. This might not be as effective as, say, a paired stimulus assessment, where everything is being compared against one another over and over again. Now, multiple stimulus with replacement. Same example. We have square, circle, triangle. Now, what does this sound like? With replacement, meaning something's going to be replaced. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overthink yourself, okay? So let's say we chose circle this time. This time, with replacement, we're going to put that circle back, and we are going to add different items that weren't chosen. So we're going to replace the square with an X. We're going to replace the triangle with a Z. Okay, that is with replacement. The item is selected, put back into the array, other items are replaced. That's straightforward. Don't overcomplicate what these multiple stimulus assessments are. They're just more stimuli, but you're trying to accomplish the same thing. You're looking at what's chosen, trying to get some sort of hierarchy. And then free operant. Now, free operant is often used interchangeably with naturalistic. By the letter of the law, by the book, not technically naturalistic, so we can't necessarily say that, because free operant is still in a way a little contrived, because what you're doing is you're taking all these different stimuli, and instead of forcing a choice on them, you're just presenting them and giving them a time, let's say 5 minutes, and they are free to engage with the items for 5 minutes, and you're just recording duration of engagement as the items are engaged with. So that's your multiple stimulus. So you can see we've got single choice, we've got 1 item. Paired choice, we've got 2 items. And then multiple, and free operant are typically going to be 3 plus. So on the exam, you likely want to start with asking yourself, how many items are we assessing at this time? Because it's going to lead you down the path towards your answer choices. If you're only getting 1 item at a time, good chance you're looking at a single stimulus assessment. Okay, so a few characteristics of each single stimulus. You can identify multiple items because it's very quick. You can use larger items and activities because you're presenting one thing at a time, right? So you don't need a lot of space, a lot of resources. However, there can be false positive results. Think about it. I'm presenting 1 item to you. And if you work with young kids especially, what do? A lot of times they just reach for it. So how much good does that really do for you if they're just reaching for every item? So you got to be careful with the single stimulus. Now, it's typically worse than the multiple stimulus and paired stimulus. While as the paired stimulus is often the best way to establish a hierarchy, it also can identify multiple items and can be used with larger items and activities. It's a little better because we are presenting 2 at a time. But there can be positional biases. If you've worked in the field, you know if you put the same item on the right over and over again, or sometimes you have clients who go left every time. You've got to be cautious of that. It also takes more time than other assessments. If I've got 6 items, I have to compare all 6 of those items against each other, and that could take some time. Multiple stimulus, you can identify multiple items quickly because you've got a lot of items in an array. Also, susceptible to positional bias, can be limited to smaller items because it depends on your space and it can be resource intensive. And then free operant, if you have a very, very behavioral client, a client who does not necessarily comply, free operant might be a good way to go because you just literally put items in front of them and observe. However, it's less likely to identify many items. Let's say, for example, you've got Legos, a toy truck, and an iPad. Let's say the client just plays on the iPad for 5 minutes. Doesn't do you a lot of good. As with everything else, all this depends on your own personal assessment. That's why you've got to get really good at assessment because what you're going to use, the assessment you're going to use, the strategy, the items are going to depend a lot on what you see and what you observe and what a lot of your indirect data show. So one thing about indirect data and our indirect assessments is they're not necessarily the best for behavior change when we're trying to make treatment plans. But for preference assessments, they can be very, very useful. Use surveys and interviews really to your advantage to get a good idea of preference assessment strategy. All right, that is preference assessments. Let's not make it more complicated than that. Reinforcer assessments, we're going to go a step further. We're going to look at how does it affect behavior. Right now, we're simply discussing preference assessments. Please subscribe if you haven't for all of our updates. We get a new task list video every Sunday, plus our practice exams that we release on the weekends and Friday. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. Our exams are printable and digital, so you can study whatever method fits your style. Let us know if you have questions. When you pass, please let us know as well so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.